Hi everybody and welcome to our latest live feed from La Palma. Ignacio and I came back, we arrived back today. And we are here, we're going to be joined by a couple of really interesting guests who I think you'll enjoy hearing from. But we're just going to wait a minute or two while people are just joining in and give you a chance just to see what we're seeing ahead of us and to hear it as well. We are on the most southern point edge of El Paso at the moment, in La Palma. And we have an incredibly dramatic view here of the edge of the new lava flow. So as you all know, I'm sure, and as we'll speak to one of our guests now shortly, part of the northern flank collapsed a couple of days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, and it led to a new lava flow streaming down the northern flank, which you can see on your screen now. And unfortunately this led to a new lava flow which has led to more destruction of more property. And in fact, very sadly, while we've been here this afternoon, we've seen more houses go up, which has been quite heartbreaking actually, and seeing people evacuating their houses with all their stuff on their piled high on their trucks. And it just made the point ever clearer that we just have to keep focusing the camera on the plight of the people here. It is an extraordinary natural event we're witnessing, but also people here are having a really tough time. There's a real human story here, and we'll update you on what we're doing in terms of the fundraising and what's happening on that front. Unfortunately, the photographer Samu can't be with us today. Hola Samu, un beso muy grande desde aquí. Siento mucho que no puedas estar aquí con nosotros ahora mismo. But just to let you know that Samu has had a really tough day himself today, helping to move one of his family members, evacuate him out of a property. So we said, of course, we will leave catching up with him until another moment when things are a bit calmer with him. Un beso muy grande, Samu. Estamos pensando en ti y en toda tu familia, amigo. Y lo nuestro lo dejamos para mañana, no te preocupes. I'm really pleased to see that the fundraising's been going very well. Thank you to all of you who've supported the fundraising. We're at over £1,500 already, I think. We have a photo agency looking at Samu's pictures, so hopefully we can get some fundraising that way as well. And while we're here this week, we want to start helping out the first few families that Samu has identified for us, and acquiring some immediate goods that they need to help, because of course they've lost everything to this volcano, and some of them need clothes or other items, and we'll go through all of that at another time. Unfortunately not today, as I say, because Samu's had a really tough day, and it's not the day to be doing that, I'm afraid. But we will keep you updated, and hopefully we'll do that tomorrow. As ever, if you have any questions as we go along, do pop them in the chat. It would be lovely to hear from you, and we'll do our best to answer them. But in the meantime, if we can have our special light technician who's with us. We have a very special guest here, I'm very pleased to say, and that's Helen Robinson. Helen, welcome, really lovely to see you.
Evening. Nice to be here.
If we can see you, yes, that's really good to see you. Now Helen was our La Palma GeoIntern way back in 2015, if memory serves. Is that right, Helen?
Yes, it was.
Oh my goodness, I didn't think we'd be seeing each other back here under these circumstances.
No,
did you?
I definitely did not think we'd be back seeing this. I mean, while it is, it's really impressive, it's also heartbreaking. I was here in 2015. I did surveys on this volcano. I got to know some of the communities and the beautiful people of the island, and it really is quite heartbreaking to see what they're going through and the destruction that we're seeing in front of us.
Yes, I mean, thankfully, and it's also worth mentioning and underlining that so far the destruction has been of property. The authorities, I have to say, have been amazing, I think, at evacuating ahead of the lava flows and studying the orography of the island and predicting which way the lava flows are going to go and keeping people safe. So I think that's the number one priority, which has been really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but the work that you did here was really interesting. So you spent a month here in 2015 doing the sampling, but then you used those skills in Africa, didn't you? Tell us a bit about that, because it's really interesting.
So, the surveys that we were doing on Cumbre Vieja is the volcanic monitoring for unrest, collecting soil gas samples, analysing for chemistry, and also CO2 flux. So flux is sort of representative of flow of CO2 in the shallow subsurface. And it's well known for use in volcanic monitoring, but in more recent years it's actually been applied in geothermal exploration, so surface exploration techniques. And the reason for that is after water vapour, carbon dioxide is rapidly escapes from a degassing magma body and preferentially moves through the subsurface along points of weakness, so faults and fractures and things like that. And you need to find those structures, those permeable structures, deep in the surface for geothermal, because that's where you're going to get fluid flow. So it allows us to identify the location of these buried structures, which then can be targeted for drilling and can contribute to reducing the risk of a failed well.
Amazing. That's so interesting. And you were doing that in Kenya, were you?
Yes.
And how much time did you spend there?
So I've been back and forth to Kenya over the last couple of years. 8 times I think I've been there now, at a place called Menengai Caldera, where the Africa's most powerful well at 35 megawatts electricity is located. I've also applied it in Ethiopia, and I've actually done some consulting with Hotspur Drilling, training their staff on the techniques and how they can apply it in that area as well.
Fantastic. That's so interesting. And I have to say, one of the repercussions of the GeoIntern program we didn't anticipate would be happening, but I'm just so pleased to hear about that. It's really good. And as you know, we followed you all of these years, and we're just so amazed and proud of everything that you're doing. And in fact, I think you're getting to the tail end of your PhD now as well.
Finally, yes. It's been one heck of a journey.
Yes.
It's taken me a little bit longer to do than I had anticipated for various reasons.
Tends to happen, yeah.
Yes.
The real world and all that.
Yeah. But you've just got to go with it, and nearly there now. Yeah.
Fantastic. But listen, as you look out across here, can you remember? Because I mean, I have to say, what strikes me here is that this is an area that Ignacio and I have spent hiking in. You know, we've got amazing videos and photographs here, and there was some beautiful Pahoehoe lava flows and lava tubes under here. Is this an area you can remember working on around El Paso in this sort of area?
I do remember the main road that's a little bit higher up than where we are now, that's obviously been sort of partially covered by the lava flow. We did sampling sites right along there. Just for a little bit further south of here, there's some stunning lava tubes that are currently inaccessible. I don't think they've been damaged from a previous eruption, but they are currently inaccessible. They're within the exclusion zone. And then obviously the Ruta de los Volcanes, the route along the ridge.
La Ruta de los Volcanes, yes. I mean, it's an extraordinary route.
I mean, it's quite a challenging hike. It's about 25 kilometres, but of course you're sort of walking around many of the relatively young cones, and so you quite often find it's sort of one step forward, 2 steps back as as everything's moving under your feet and what have you. And we walked that, and we sampled along there as well. It's
an absolutely stunning area, and I have to say it's something that I've spoken to with quite a few people around here, and just saying, although while the emergency is ongoing, that's one thing. I think afterwards, I think this has really put Palma on the map, and a lot of people will want to come and see not only this eruption, but the beautiful volcanic edifices that there are all the way. That walking route is just amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it, really.
It is a stunning...
But a challenge.
It is
definitely a challenge. And I was speaking to a colleague of ours at CSIC who was saying actually that he thinks that some of the lava is pushing through some of the channels that had been set up for the 1949 eruption, so that's interesting to see whether the conduits were being still used for this eruption from way back in 1949, because this is the third, of course, eruption in living memory, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's looking pretty impressive this evening.
Yeah, so this new lava flow is heading down to the sea, but it hasn't actually made it to the sea yet. As you know, we were in Tazacorte last time round when the first lava flow hit the sea. But it's quite dark down there, but you can see the front edge here, but it hasn't quite hit the sea yet. And that'll be the next thing that people are looking out for. You've been down to Tazacorte, have you, and seen the lava dropping into the sea?
We tried to go down there yesterday, but we weren't able to get to a position where we could see the ocean entry. Obviously this new lava flow was sort of starting to encroach on the routes that you might want to take to get down to a safe viewpoint. So we didn't go down there in the end, but we did try and get down there. So it is one thing that I've not been able to go and view, unfortunately. But it's better to be safe than sorry, to be fair.
Absolutely, and respectful as well,
Yes.
obviously, of any exclusion zones or any advice of the authorities, and that's something else we're always at pains to point out to anybody thinking of coming here. The exclusion zones have been fantastic at ensuring that people are safe, so we just want to be respectful of all of that and make sure that we abide by anything that the local authorities are telling us, because they do it for a reason.
Yeah.
So Helen, tell us a little about why you're here, because you're not just here just to see the volcano, are you? You're actually working. Tell us a bit about what you're doing here.
Yes, so there's a few things, two key things really.
One is to see us, obviously, because we've missed you.
I know, it's been far too long.
Yes.
So in collaboration with your other guest this evening, who will
the
be
holder of the light, who is in shadow, but we will see him very shortly. Yes.
We are doing some image updates. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I will let him do that. Image updates for a republishing of a book. And the book is about sort of the volcanoes throughout Europe. And so we wanted to get some up-to-date imagery. Also sort of get a bit more about the community, about the impact of the community to the community's education programs and things like that. We want to try and involve things like that in the book as well. So that's one of the things, and then the other thing is to develop further collaborations. So I've been speaking to the Palma Research Centre today, looking into projects to explore if the groundwater quality might have been impacted by the volcanic eruption. We don't know that, it may not have been, but obviously if there is any evidence that it might have been, how can we mitigate against that in the future? What can we do about that in the short term? And also to explore geothermal energy on the island eventually.
Good.
A couple of years down the line. But we're looking at maybe developing some community projects. So instead of going for one of these bigger power plants, looking at more smaller, modular, community-led projects, speaking to the communities, finding out, teaching them more about geothermal and finding out what kind of application they would like to get out of a geothermal installation, whether it's electricity or whether it's greenhouse heating or anything like that.
Brilliant. On that point, Dougal, do step into the light and tell us a little about what you've been doing. Here, I'll hold this for you, don't worry. Are you all right there? Yeah. I'll just shine down there so you can see what you're doing before I get anybody falling over and walking over. So Dougal, tell us who you are and where you come from, first of all, for this game show of a programme.
Yeah, I'm Dougal Jerram. I've come over from the UK, based in Solihull. I run a company there, but I'm also a research professor at the University of Oslo.
Brilliant. And what are you doing here?
So a few years back I updated a book which was called Volcanoes of Europe, and within that book there's a whole section on Spain, on the Canary Islands. And so once the eruption started, it was clear that I needed to get out here as soon as possible to basically document what's happening and to try and also make some connections with people here to sort of update that part of the book. So part of my Research is science outreach, so writing books. I do quite a lot of stuff with the media, and I was able to do a couple of news interviews while I've been out here, which have been helpful to provide information about the volcano to people, and generally, really, from my perspective, just to find out what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, very good. Now we're just going to do a little panning shot because, of course, we've got quite a bit darker since we started. Difficult to see, I think, with the zoom on. It has got too dark, I think, for people to see. So you've been here, you've been keeping up with the eruption. What's been changing while you've been here? Have you seen any changes in the volcano? Because it certainly looks very different to when we were here a few days ago.
Yeah, I mean, when we arrived on Sunday, it was very explosive. The lava fountains were really sort of ejecting quite high into the air.
Yeah.
Very, very loud indeed. Sort of didn't sleep a great deal that night. You know, buildings and windows are rattling and things like that. And
you're staying in El Paso.
Yeah.
Aren't you?
So we're probably sort of maybe 2.5-3 kilometers north of the eruption center, and you know, and it makes me think. You know, I didn't sleep very well, but I'm going home in a couple of days.
Yes.
You know, the people on the island in this sort of area are they can't escape, if you like. You know, they've got to stay here. They've got to, you know, be nearby because, you know, their jobs, their livelihoods, their families are all here. You know, they can't leave. So that was a bit of a reality check, if you like, with respect to that. Yeah. So it's not as noisy at the moment. It's not as loud. The explosions on Sunday were like cannons going off, I guess.
Yes.
And it was constant.
Yes.
There was no let up, which is quite unusual, I think, for Strombolian sort of activity. You quite often, it'll sort of have some explosions and some lava fountains, and then it'll go quiet, and then a little, you know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a day, whatever, it'll start again.
Yeah.
So that constant activity on Sunday and Sunday night was certainly quite, from my perspective, was quite unexpected. And recently, sort of yesterday and today in particular, I'm really, really surprised at the amount of ash that's associated with this eruption. It seems it's just a lot more than I was expecting to see from this style of eruption.
Yeah, and the column of ash sort of gone up to 3.5,
4 kilometres. Yeah, and it has. When the wind direction changed a couple of days ago, it closed the airport for a day and a half or so. I mean, when we came in on Sunday, we were delayed because of
Did you fly in directly to La Palma, or did you go via
No, so we flew into Tenerife and then connected in.
So they're actually rerouting, I think, planes via the airspace of Lanzarote, so they're coming around Tenerife a different way now because of the ash, which is interesting. It's obviously an ongoing situation which keeps changing and shows no signs of letting up just yet. I mean, we've still got seismic swarms going on. I think we've had 10 lots of seismic swarms in the last 2 years to build up to this. And as I keep saying every time we do this, I'm not a scientist, but what people tell me is that the seismic swarms going on in the south seem to be sort of recharging the system, sort of pulling up lava from quite a depth. So it's not just a magma chamber emptying that will then sort of, you know, stop and empty. It's actually pulling up magma from deep down 30 kilometres.
Yeah, you have those fluid pathways, and the earthquakes that are being generated is sort of magma pushing up through the rock, and as it's pushing up through the subsurface, it's fracturing it, it's cracking it and opening it up and creating more pathways for, in this case, you know, more magma to make its way to the surface.
And another interesting point a scientist made to us, which again I hadn't even thought about, he said, you know, they have a ground deformation of 15 centimetres, and normally you would expect that deformation to fall back down into a depression, and then you know that the eruption's coming to an end. But that hasn't happened here yet, so there's still 15 centimeters of deformation. But in El Hierro, there was deformation of the terrain, and there was still deformation of the terrain even after the eruption finished. Which means there's obviously some indicators and levers going on in these eruptions, which they're getting a lot greater understanding of.
Yes.
Because there's a huge amount of monitoring from lots of different agencies going on here, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Canary Islands Institute of Volcanology, who I did my internship with, along with yourselves.
Yeah.
They do the soil gas monitoring. They've been doing the seismicity, but you've had sort of universities from all over the world coming over to collaborate and do sort of monitor the gases that are in the plume. There's been ash samples sent back to the UK where they're going to do analysis for respiratory analysis on that, which is really interesting. You've got sort of satellites, so Copernicus emergency management have been doing all the sort of the lava flow mapping and updating it on a daily basis.
I mean, that's extraordinary, just seeing those images and every day the overlapping lava flows coming over.
I mean, it's really interesting, it's fascinating to see, but it also demonstrates how quick we're able to get this data and use the data and apply it in, to keeping people safe, and to also understanding what might happen. We can't say for definite a lava flow is going to go in this direction or it's going to stop tomorrow or anything like that. We can't do that, but we can sort of start getting better ideas, which helps the emergency services evacuate people away from areas that they think are going to be impacted.
And they've done that very well, actually. And I have to say on this point, one thing I've been particularly pleased to see, science, that there can be odd currents going on in science with people trying to get their version sort of in the limelight or competing theories on things. But what I've been really delighted to see here is that everybody has been collaborating together without any sort of backstories. Just because they want to keep people in La Palma safe. And I think, this island has got the shape of a heart, and I think it is the island of the Canary Islands that really is in everybody's hearts. The people here are extraordinary, and everybody wants to work as hard as they can to keep everybody safe. I mean, it's a shame we can't keep all their properties safe, but, let's keep trying to do our best to keep people safe. We've got a couple of questions coming in, so I have to turn my head here a little bit. Got a question, says Marcus. Hello, Marcus. How visible is the eruption from the other islands? That's such a good question. And are they being affected by it? That's such a good question. So we've just come over from Tenerife, and you can certainly see the sort of plume in the distance. I don't think you can see any of the sort of lava fountain or jetting or any of that, but you can certainly see the plume. But we have had some ash fall in some of the other islands, I believe, as well. And actually that's a good thing in some respects, because that ash is actually quite nutritious for the soil, isn't it? For islands that have quite a large sort of agriculture sector.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, when I flew in on Sunday, you could see the ash plume sort of cutting up through the clouds and what have you. So you can see that, like you say, you can't really see the lava from a great distance. Most of the time, the wind is carrying the ash out into the Atlantic, but a couple of days ago the wind direction changed, and so the ash was being blown across the island. So I think Tenerife was impacted a little bit, wasn't it?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, so it does impact the other islands, but the position.
But I'd have to say, I just want to clarify, just in case anybody's coming on holiday or thinking of travelling here. When she means impact, it means a little bit of ash might sort of fall in your car. It's not that there's any sort of danger.
No.
And actually, in terms of anybody thinking of coming on holiday to the Canary Islands, there's no issues in terms of going to Tenerife or Gran Canaria or any of these other islands. So please don't take that to mean
Canary Islands are open for business.
Yes, they are. And in fact, this is one of the really interesting things that the local president here of the Cabildo has been at pains to stress over the last few days. 90% of La Palma as well is operating normally.
Yes.
And you know, they want people to know that you know, this is affecting about 10% of the island, because sometimes you know, the images are very dramatic. I mean, the photographs are using huge telescopic lenses, and sometimes it's difficult to get an idea of scale. So we are talking about 10% of the island, but the rest of the island is functioning.
Yes.
But even there, I have to say, there's some very difficult stories. We've been recording our volcano stories again today, and I was speaking to a waitress in a local bar in Breña Baja, a very small local bar, and she was saying that, you know, local people aren't going out as much; they're staying home, even though they're not being directly affected by the volcano. You know, they can feel some earthquakes, and they're not feeling very confident really about sort of doing everything as normally as possible. And her two sisters-in-law, who just moved to Llanos de Aridane, so not far from here, had signed a lease on a new flat, and they had got a couple of jobs lined up, you know, and then the volcano erupted, and that just turned everything upside down, and that's really tough. So they lost the flat because they needed the flat to rehouse people who'd lost their property, and obviously they lost their job, and you know, so it's going to be tricky for them to find new jobs. So there's a lot of those sort of knock-on effects, and I think that's what's going to be interesting, spending a bit more time here during the eruption, and just being able to record these stories and just speak to people and just get a wider feel for how people are being affected here.
Yeah.
But of course, once this is all over, you know, it's going to be a huge tourist attraction, really, isn't it?
I mean, yes, it will be. You know, once it's all safe and calmed down and what have you, it will be developed into a tourist attraction. You know, it is an eruption centre that forms part of the ridge, so it'll be sort of a new experience for people to see that, and to see the breach as well, and how the cooled lava, you know, that lava flow, some of that will cool, and you will see how sort of the cone and the breach has interacted with each other and things like that. And it, you know, and it is quite interesting, but you know, at the heart of it all, we still need to be respectful of those that have been you know, affected by it.
Yeah, no, of course. Rosie, hello Rosie, nice to see you. You're normally here with me, and you've escaped back to the UK. I'm not sure how I feel about that, actually, Rosie.
Hi Rosie.
Hi Rosie.
I was following you.
Rosie just made it back to uni, actually. It was brilliant, and so I think on the way down she had to log into one of our follow-up GeoIntern lectures in the car, and when she just arrived, the next one. Gosh, that is getting loud now. So that was well done you, Rosie. So Rosie, you're asking, has your perception of the eruption changed going back to La Palma for a second time? Rosie, that's such an interesting question, because actually it's very different coming back the second time. I think the first time was such a roller coaster of emotions, because when we arrived we were super excited, and then of course you start seeing the impact, and then you know, it's quite upsetting, and then you end up sort of questioning what you're doing here and having to be very clear on what you're doing and why. And I think that's, you know, as we talked about at length, a really important process to go through whenever you're in a situation like this. And being back here a second time, I think I feel a lot calmer, because I have a very clear idea of what we're doing and why. And the fact that we're really starting to raise money to help people who have been affected by this, but at the same time doing an educational job which will help future scientists to engage with what's the process that's been going on here, and hopefully, you know, encourage them to go into volcanology and help us to learn more about it. You know, that's a huge part of what we do, and really important, because actually what always strikes me as a non-scientist, as I keep saying, is how little we know about these processes and how much we still have to learn. Even in the last 8 years that we've been doing GeoTenerife and these programs, our understanding of these islands has come on apace, but there's still a lot to do. So if you are a young scientist or a young student logging into these broadcasts, you know, by all means consider volcanology. We need a whole cross-section of scientists from lots of different backgrounds to engage with volcanology, because I think as time goes on we're going to be drawing on lots of different disciplines and skills to really get to the bottom of what's going on here. And I think just a classic education won't necessarily cover all the directions that it's going in. I mean, just talking about Copernicus and all these other areas that are suddenly being drawn in, and people from different disciplines that are helping us to understand what's happening and how, and being able to decode it, I think is one of the more exciting things that's going to come out of all of this, because it's probably one of, if not the most studied, observed, accessible volcanic eruptions ever. I mean, here we are standing not too far from it. And if you're a scientist, that's quite exciting, because a lot of volcanoes around the world are obviously in quite inaccessible places.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, we have another question here. Is eruption possible on other islands? That's a really good question, actually, one that comes up a lot. And again, I'm not a scientist, but what Alexis, our expert, said last time is that the volcanic systems here are not interlinked. So just because there's an eruption in La Palma doesn't mean there's going to be one in Tenerife or Gran Canaria or Hierro or any other island. So they all have their own individual feeding systems.
Yeah.
How would you explain that, Helen? I mean, I know they talk about this being a hot spot, and there being a sort of plume underneath that feeds these islands, but it's not like there's a whole well of magma just sitting under all the islands and they're all going to come out at the same time. Is that right?
They all have different characteristics, different eruption styles. La Palma is the youngest. So the further west you go, generally speaking, you get younger. There are some variations on that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's really important to stress that, like you've said yourself, just because we have an eruption going on here does not mean to say that any of the other islands are going to erupt anytime soon.
And if they do, it's because of their own sort of factors,
their own system,
not because
this one's erupting at all. It's just the process that's related to that specific volcanic centre, and sort of magma movement beneath that volcanic centre.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to focus in on the volcano because there's a bit less traffic going behind us now, and I think people might want to just tune in and just listen to the sound. It's quite dramatic. One thing I have to say that's really struck me being here both times is, even though we can get quite close to the volcano, we can still hear birds during the day, animals going about their business. There's some, nighttime crickets or whatever they are chirping away in the background. Nature is amazing. I mean, they adapt to what's going on and just crack on. I think that's something we'd really like to pick up on with a couple of experts that we're meeting later in the week. How nature just adapts to these events. You can see all the lava flow illuminated down the hill now. Brilliant. Well, Helen, I have to say, guys, to both of you, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been such a joy to meet you both. And do go crack in there as well. I'll get the lighting. Mind the uneven footing underfoot.
Derelict housing.
Yes. But honestly, congratulations on the work that you're doing. Really exciting, and I think you're taking it in some really novel directions, which we'd be very happy to support you with going forward, because I think, again, it's picking up on threads that haven't necessarily been looked at before and are just so important, aren't they, in terms of volcanic eruptions and living with volcanoes.
I think something that's quite not unique, but something that's happened in the last couple of years because of the development of very, very high resolution surveying of the volcanoes and monitoring of the volcanoes. We've seen this in Iceland, we've seen this here. You can literally sort of map out the birth of a volcano. So people were aware that the seismic activity on La Palma was building up. They forecast that there was likely to be an eruption, and eventually it did erupt. And then we're able to watch that eruption, how it develops, how the lava flows interact with each other, how they reach the sea. They build out new land into the sea. But ultimately, eventually, fingers crossed, this volcano will calm down and then will eventually stop. And you'll have had the whole life cycle of one of these eruptive systems. And every time we do that on a volcano, we learn something more. And so, particularly, the past is the key to the present is the key to the future. By looking and monitoring these volcanoes and how each eruption is slightly different and modifies the landscape, we learn new things each time. And because of the advent of all of these digital monitoring systems, the satellite data and everything like that, we're in a position now where we're really data rich. So there's a lot of information. For many years, there'll be researchers sort of poring over that information from this volcano, because it's going to tell us something new about understanding the system of the Canary Island volcanoes.
That's such a good point, and actually, it might help us understand the other islands as well if they go through seismic swarms or activity is detected that is similar to what's been going on here, because already this volcano here, I think, has been erupting for longer than Teneguía. It's one of the longest erupting volcanoes in historic record here in La Palma, certainly.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more to be learned.
And that is quite important, because one of your viewers asked a question earlier on about the other islands. There have been historic eruptions on many of the Canary Islands, so it's important to learn from each one and to try and monitor the islands as best as we can to mitigate as and when new eruptions do occur.
And by historic eruptions, just for anybody who's not clear, because it's something I wasn't clear about a few years ago, by historic eruptions we're talking about eruptions that have happened and people have been here to witness and record them, so the last sort of 500 years or so.
Yeah, so we're talking sort of the late 1400s when the islands were colonised, and since then people have recorded as and when eruptions have happened, and they've not just been restricted to La Palma, there have been eruptions on some of the other islands. So when we say historic eruptions, we mean the eruptions that people have witnessed.
Yeah. And I think one of the longest of the historic eruptions was actually in Lanzarote. I mean, it's very difficult to think of Lanzarote erupting now, but that went on for 6 years. But I mean, that is very unusual, isn't it? Normally it seems to be, a few weeks to a few months, but not much longer than that in terms of how long they erupt for historically here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, many of the recent historic eruptions have been relatively low volume in terms of the magma volume that's coming out. So even the Lanzarote eruption, although it lasted 6 years, was by sort of geological standards a relatively small eruption. So
this has caught us by surprise, though, hasn't it? I mean, there were some figures bandied about early on about, I don't know what it was, 11 cube. Anyway, 4 times more material has come out of here already than was expected at the beginning of the eruption. If you can say that you can expect a certain amount of material to erupt.
Yeah, people have tried to sort of, using a mixture of satellite data, the seismic signals and so on, trying to estimate the volume of magma.
Eruptible material that's ready to go.
Material in the magma reservoir, for example. But there's a couple of things that are very difficult to, that's not an exact science, and it's very difficult to actually measure those things. But also there's magma recharge. There's clear from the seismic evidence that the system is being recharged from depth, and so that additional material is also adding to the eruption. So that can prolong and make the eruptions longer.
So that material that's coming from depth, is it different to the material that was near the surface? Is it more explosive, less explosive? Does it behave differently?
Well, this is something that I think the monitoring will bring out. For example, one thing we can do is we can actually look at the petrology, the crystals that sit within the magma, and we can see if they're changing. So, for example, often in a magmatic system, you might have the early magma coming out is what we call slightly more evolved. It's a little bit more silica rich. You've got slightly different mineral compositions within them. But if you get a recharge, you often get what we call a very primitive magma. So you can sometimes see that in the change in the crystal types. And so I know that there's petrologists working on the lava flows. There's going to be people looking at all of this information to see whether there were key signals as the eruption changed through time that suggested that new, slightly different magma was coming into the system, or not.
It might be that it's all coming from one big vat at depth, and it all has the same signal. So these are the sorts of things that we'll be looking for, almost like a little sort of forensic kind of look at the magma. The sort of work you can do down a microscope and actually look at the stuff in section.
Well, and the exciting thing is lots of science to be done for years to come, which is what you guys as scientists love.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, thank you very much indeed. We're going to wrap that up for this evening. Thank you to Helen and to Dougal, and good night from La Palma, this volcano yet to be named, but I'm sure they'll make up their mind some point soon. And we'll put a notice out on social media about tomorrow. We're just going to see how Samu gets on. Si estás ahí, Samu, un beso muy grande desde todos nosotros. Thank you very much to everybody. Fuerza La Palma, estamos con ustedes y ánimo, saquen esa garra y los queremos mucho. Venga. Good night, everybody.